Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from Maryland.
reserving the right to object. And let me just explain to my friend from Florida, a very valued member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. We have 2 pending amendments. We have also been working to get a vote on Senator Brasso's amendment dealing with terrorism. We are trying to work through, Senator Corker and I, many amendments that we can clear that members have brought forward. They're working with us to get those amendments where we can consider them. And for an orderly process, since there have been so many amendments that have been filed, I might say they've all been filed by Republican members of the Senate, we need to make sure we have an orderly way to consider these amendments and vote on these amendments. And for those reasons, Mr. President, I do object.
Objection is heard.
Well, Mr. President, just for a point of clarification, I am a member of the committee that heard this. These amendments, particularly the one with Israel's right to exist, were available to me at the time. I chose not to offer them in consultation with the senators that had worked so hard to put this together. I could have offered my amendment in the committee. I did not, in order to work in a cooperative way to move it from the committee and onto the floor. I was told, I will admit that I did not speak to Senator Cardin about this in particular, but I was told by multiple members that the right place and the right time for me to offer this amendment would be on the floor, not in the committee, because the hope was to get it to the floor as quickly as possible. And so in an effort to move this issue to the floor, I held back on filing this particular amendment with regards to Israel's right to exist on the assurances and on the conversations that we had that, in fact, when we got to the floor, these amendments will be heard. Now, if in fact it turns out that today's not going to be the day we vote on the amendment, I understand that. I know there are a lot of other people with ideas they want voted on. My understanding that I've been told is that there is potentially the effort here to say we shouldn't have any amendments or just have 3 or 4 amendments. And I think that that's an unfair position to take. I'm not saying that that's what the senator from Maryland is arguing, but I hope that at some point as the order is established, I will continue to make this motion in the hope that this amendment not just can be pending, but it can be part of this debate. And I respect the views of my colleagues, some who I think will come to the floor and say they agree with me on the substance of it, but they don't want to vote on the amendment because they think it endangers the agreement that we have in place or the bill that's in place. But I do think it deserves a vote. And I do think it deserves that debate. And I hope that in this orderly process, as it's established, that in fact these 2 amendments, I have filed 7, but I've prioritized these 2, that these 2 will get the consideration that I believe it deserves.
Mr. President.
The senator from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. President. And as Senator Rubio pointed out, we had no discussions about this, so I don't know which senators he's referring to. But let me just talk briefly about some of the points that Senator Rubio mentioned, because I think they're important that we respond to it. First, the bill we are considering, S615, is a bill that doesn't deal with the merits of a potential deal. It deals with the right way for Congress to review a potential deal that is reached between the United States and our trading partners in Iran concerning its nuclear weapon program. That is what this bill does. It doesn't say whether the president's agreement's a good one, a bad one, etc. It's a process for us to review it and take appropriate action because we are the ones that impose the sanctions. Only the Congress can permanently change or eliminate the sanctions. Therefore, it's important that we have an orderly way to review the potential deal. That's what it does, nothing more, nothing less. It also, by the way, gives us the opportunity to get notice of material breaches and be able to take action to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear weapon state if they, in fact, breach the agreement. So the 2 points that Senator Rubio mentioned, the first is that there are different interpretations being given, one by the United States and one by the Iranians. Well, the First Amendment that we filed, we think is going to help deal with that. It's pending right now. That requires us to get every official document of a potential deal in the language in which it's agreed to. So we're going to have the specific, that amendment is pending. It's filed by Senator Corker and me for the reasons that Senator Rubio mentioned, and that is we want to see the original text. We don't want to have the interpretation by the Iranians. We want to know what the language says. That's our responsibility. We're going to get that once we take up this First Amendment. I hope it's approved. That will give us the original language text of every agreement and exhibit that's agreed to between the parties. The second issue that Senator Rubio mentions is Israel's right to exist and Iran acknowledging Israel's right to exist. I fully agree with Senator Rubio. I don't think there's a member of this body that doesn't want Israel legitimated by every country in the world. It is our key ally in the Middle East. It's a country that shares our values. It has a strategic relationship with the United States, and I could go on and on. Since 1948, the United States and Israel has enjoyed a very close, important relationship, and we've taken so many actions in this body in order to protect Israel's right to exist. And that's why we included your language and Senator Boxer's language in this bill, where we say the president should determine the agreement in no way compromises the commitment of the United States to Israel's security, nor its support for Israel's right to exist. We have that in the bill. Now, what Senator Rubio's amendment would have us do, and let me just explain this. What his amendment would have us do is require that the president certify to us before he could submit any agreement, enter into any agreement, that Iran has recognized Israel's right to exist. Now, this agreement that we're negotiating with the P5, our negotiating partners in Iran, is to deal with Iran's nuclear weapon program. I know in my conversations with the Israeli government, they think that's the most important thing for their existence. The most important thing, that Iran does not become a nuclear weapon state. That's what Israel needs, and that's what we're trying to get. The Rubio amendment, although it's not intended to do that, would say, no, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is to negotiate the language of what Iran says about Israel, not their nuclear weapon program. And if the president must achieve that, and you're negotiating, the more things you put on the table, the weaker position you're in achieving the most important point. And that is making sure we have a strong agreement that Iran can never become a nuclear weapon state. That's why this amendment will accomplish just the opposite as far as Israel's security is concerned. Yes, it's a poison pill. Yes, it will defeat this bill. That also happens to be true. And yes, it will mean that it'll be almost impossible for the president to negotiate a nuclear agreement with Iran. I think most people in this body and most people in America believe the best course is a negotiated agreement with Iran. The unintended consequences of this amendment would make it virtually impossible to have that agreement completed. So yes, we can get into debate on the specifics of your amendment. I'm more than happy to do that. But we have an orderly process here. And there are a lot of amendments that have been filed. And we're trying to work out a way to do this. We've been on the floor, Senator Corker and I, now for 4 days, 5 days, debating this issue. And we'll debate any member who wants to come by, because we want to make sure that we do have an open debate. But we're going to follow an orderly process. And this amendment, as well intended as it is an amendment that would very much compromise what we've tried to do in a bipartisan way. And that's to make sure that this Senate and the House has an orderly way to consider any deal struck between our negotiating partners, the United States and Iran. That's our responsibility, and we're going to stay focused on that, and we're going to end with a bipartisan product that is, in I think, the best traditions of the United States Senate. So I respect very deeply my colleagues' commitment to Israel. I do. All of us are committed to Israel. But let's think about what's the most important thing for Israel. And that is having a strong agreement that prevents Iran from becoming a nuclear weapon state. Let's focus on that, because that, I think, this bill helps us achieve. I yield the floor.
President.
The senator from Florida.
And I appreciate the senator from Maryland's passion, and he makes points that I think are very relevant to a debate once we're on the amendment. And that's all I'm asking for, is a vote on the amendment. And he's made an argument right now about why he thinks we should not pass this amendment. I respect the orderly process. I didn't necessarily recognize that coming to the floor and trying to get my amendment pending is somehow unravels this orderly process. But I'm more than happy to work within the orderly process as long as I can get a vote on my amendment. Whatever that process entails, I'll be more than happy to have it explain to me where I fit in this orderly process, and at the appropriate moment, we will file the amendment. But what I want is a vote on the amendment. And then the argument you've made here today can be made. And the only other point I would make is it is true, tragically, that there are a number of countries in the Middle East that do not recognize Israel's right to exist. The difference is that those countries are not trying to build a nuclear weapon, nor are they building long-range rockets, nor do they use terrorism as an instrument of statecraft, nor do every Friday do they hold ceremonies in which their top leader chants death to Israel and death to America, nor do they actively support terrorist groups around the world who exist for the sole purpose of destroying Israel itself, nor do they have billions of dollars in sanctions that are about to be released. And so, at the end of the day, there's a big difference between what's happening in Iran and the billions of dollars we're about to turn over to them, and these other countries that unfortunately do not recognize Israel's right to exist, but are not going around actually actively trying to destroy the state of Israel. And the last point on the differences in the details, listen, I don't think that the fact sheet the State Department put out is sufficient. I think the deal as described by the president isn't good enough and won't lead to the prevention of a nuclear weapon. But all I'm asking for in my amendment is for the deal that he submits to be the one that he says he negotiated. He has told us already we have reached a preliminary agreement. He's announced it to the world what that preliminary agreement is. And all I'm saying is what you submit to us must be what you told us it is. And here's why I say this. Because this negotiation has been going on for a while. And every month that goes by, Iran gains more concessions and our position slips further and further. If you look where we were at the beginning of this process to where we are today, it's a very different place from where we were not that long ago. We are in a very different place than we were in terms of what we had originally said. When this whole thing started 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the United Nations Security Council put sanctions on Iran and said, you're not even allowed to enrich or reprocess. Now they're allowed to enrich and reprocess. They're even allowed to enrich and reprocess at an even higher rate for research purposes. If these negotiations keep going on, we're going to end up building the bomb for them at the rate it's going. Because every year and every month that goes by, they gain more and more concessions. And so all I'm trying to do is, at a minimum, freeze this thing in place and say, Mr. President, you've told us that you have negotiated a deal. Mr. President, you put out a fact sheet that told us what the deal is. You've represented it to the American people as the deal. And now all this will say is, what you submit to us must be what you told us you agreed to on April 2nd. Don't come back here in 6 months and submit to us a deal, and as it turns out, the Iranian fact sheet is the one we should have been relying on. And all I'm asking, even though I don't think that what he's agreed to is sufficient, all I am asking in my second amendment is that the deal he submits be the deal he says it is. Nothing more and nothing less. I hope that through this orderly process, that the moment will arrive before we vote on passage of this, that my amendments can be heard and voted on. And I respect the arguments that others make about why they can't support it and what they think it will ultimately do to the process. All I'm asking for is votes on these amendments, and then everyone is free to vote the way they want and for the reasons they want. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.